I was a golfer, and I really I'd never been in any kind of a situation like that, and I didn't know where to go.
He says, I think you're making a mistake in not calling it the Masters.
Yeah, that's when I was dangerous, because it wasn't my money, so I had no pressure.
Golf legends explain why Lee Trevino is SHet. That's what the packaging says, and honestly, when you look at what happened between Lee Trevino and the golf establishment during the late 1960s and 1970s, you start to understand why the elite were so uncomfortable with him. But here's the thing, Trevino wasn't just good at golf. He was a 6-time major champion who could beat anyone on any given day. So why did golf's greatest legends think his methods were substandard? Why did they consider him an outsider, a disruptor, someone who didn't belong in their carefully curated world of elegance and tradition? The answer is complicated. Trevino represented something the establishment couldn't control. He was a technical outlier with an ugly swing. He was a social defiant from extreme poverty who refused to bow down to the game's elitism. And he was a psychological weapon who used constant chatter to destabilize his rivals. Every single thing that made the traditional golf world uncomfortable about Lee Trevino was actually the exact mechanism that made him so dangerous as a competitor. Let's start with the most famous rivalry of all, Jack Nicklaus versus Lee Trevino, the Golden Bear versus the Supermex. This wasn't just about two great players competing. This was about two completely different philosophies of golf crashing into each other on the biggest stages in the sport. Nicklaus was the ultimate high ball master. He hit soaring, powerful draws that could hold the firmest greens. His swing was textbook. His approach was cerebral, calculated, and stoic. He represented everything the golf establishment valued. And then here comes Trevino with his weird, low-trajectory fade that looked nothing like what the textbooks taught. Nicklaus didn't hide his disdain for Trevino's signature shot. He said, anyone can hit it low. That statement right there tells you everything. Nicklaus was basically saying that Trevino's stock shot was the easiest, lowest level form of ball striking. It wasn't sophisticated. It wasn't powerful. It was just simple. But Trevino had a philosophy behind that low fade. He said, you can talk to a fade, but a hook won't listen. Trevino built his entire swing around eliminating the devastating miss. The hook could ruin your round instantly, but a fade was controllable and consistent under pressure. He engineered what he called an anti-left release, which meant his club face wouldn't rotate and produce that dangerous hook. Trevino would line up his body 30 to 40 degrees left of the target at address. Then he'd swing along his stance line, and the ball would curve back toward the target. He could hit different shot shapes just by adjusting the club face at address without changing his swing path. The problem was that this technical approach came with a limitation. Trevino hit the ball low, really low, and that became his Achilles heel at one specific tournament, Augusta National, the Masters. That course demands high trajectory, approaches to hold those elevated, firm greens. Trevino openly admitted he could never hit the ball high enough to play Augusta. It wasn't about hitting a draw, he could do that. It was about the vertical trajectory. His mastery of accuracy came at the cost of height, and this is where the golf establishment really hammered him. They saw his technical limitation as proof that his entire system was inferior. The elite looked at Trevino's swing and called it flawed, crooked, unrefined. To them, it wasn't real golf, it was survival golf. The kind of thing you'd see on a hardpan municipal course in Texas, not on the pristine fairways of Augusta or other championship venues. They couldn't separate the aesthetics from the results. Because Trevino's swing didn't look like what the textbooks taught, they assumed it was wrong. They missed the entire point. His swing was forged in necessity. He learned to play on difficult courses where the ground was hard and the wind was brutal. Every element of his technique was a direct response to his environment. He wasn't trying to look good, he was trying to survive and win money. That's a fundamentally different motivation than someone who learned golf at a country club with a professional instructor smoothing out all the rough edges. The establishment's technical snobbery revealed their own narrow-mindedness. They valued form over function, beauty over effectiveness, tradition over innovation. And Trevino's success, despite their disapproval, proved that there was more than one way to achieve greatness in golf. Before we go further, take a second to drop a comment. Do you think Trevino's swing was genius or just lucky? And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button because we've got more stories like this coming your way. Now, here's where things get interesting. Trevino's technical limitation at Augusta intersected perfectly with his deepest personal grudge. And that grudge was against one man, Cliff Roberts. Clifford Roberts was the co-founder and autocratic chairman of Augusta National and the Masters Tournament. He was synonymous with the club's elitist, old-school Southern traditions. And when I say old school, I mean deeply racist and exclusionary. Roberts once said, "As long as I'm alive, all the golfers will be white, and all the waiters and the caddies will be black." That quote tells you everything you need to know about the environment Trevino walked into as a Mexican-American from extreme poverty. Trevino and Roberts locked horns the first time they met. Trevino carried what he called a chip on his shoulder about privileged types, born from his difficult upbringing and reinforced by the exclusionary culture he experienced on tour. So what did Trevino do? He boycotted the Masters. For several years during his competitive prime, one of the world's best golfers simply refused to show up. Roberts eventually realized this looked bad, so he tried to smooth things over. He invited Trevino to meet for coffee and talk things out. It was a classic power move, a private meeting where Roberts could control the narrative and get Trevino back in line. But Trevino wasn't having it. His response became legendary. He told Roberts, "I don't drink coffee. That's it." Short, dismissive, final. This wasn't just about refusing a beverage. Trevino was rejecting the entire social structure Roberts represented. He refused to participate in performative civility that would require him to tacitly accept the racial and class hierarchy of the club. By refusing the private meeting, Trevino kept the conflict public and principled. And here's the beautiful part. The technical problem and the social problem converged into one comprehensive act of resistance. Trevino's low ball flight gave him an ironclad competitive reason to avoid Augusta. He couldn't win there anyway because of his swing. So instead of framing it as a failure, he transformed it into a political statement. He turned a potential weakness into a strength by making it about principle instead of ability. But the most consistent source of competitive tension came from Trevino's head-to-head battles with Nicklaus. Trevino had a knack for beating the Golden Bear when it mattered most, and it started right at the beginning. In 1968 at the US Open at Oak Hill, Trevino was the relative unknown. Nicklaus was already the game's greatest player. Trevino shot below par every single day, which was a first for the US Open. He finished at 275, tying Nicklaus's own record for the lowest 72-hole score. Nicklaus shot a final round 67 just to finish second, 4 strokes behind. The golf world was shocked. They called Trevino a jumping bean. Nobody expected him to dominate like that. 3 years later, they met again at the 1971 US Open at Marion. This time, it came down to an 18-hole playoff, and Trevino did it again. He shot 68. Nicklaus shot 71. After the round, Nicklaus admitted, "It was very disappointing, but he went out and shot 68, and a 68 at Marion is darn good golf. He had a knack for playing some of his best golf against me." That acknowledgement tells you everything. Nicklaus, the ultimate competitor, couldn't figure out how to consistently beat Trevino when the pressure was on. The reason for that comes down to psychology. Trevino's entire competitive approach was built on externalizing pressure through humor and conversation. Nicklaus relied on stoic concentration. He calculated every shot, controlled every variable, maintained a mental bubble of focus. Trevino shattered that bubble with constant talking. The most famous example happened before the 1971 playoff. To lighten the tension, Trevino pulled a toy rubber snake from his golf bag. It was his daughter's toy that he'd forgotten was in there. He tossed it at Nicklaus as a prank. It startled a woman nearby, but Nicklaus laughed, and that moment allowed Trevino to step onto the course, loosened up and ready. He won that playoff. Trevino later admitted he drove Nicklaus crazy with his talking. Before their first round together, Nicklaus approached Trevino and said he preferred silence during competition. Trevino's response was perfect. "That's okay. You don't have to talk. You just have to listen." By forcing Nicklaus to react, laugh, or just endure the monologue, Trevino introduced variability into Nicklaus's controlled environment. His humor wasn't malicious. It was a weapon, a self-regulation tool that happened to disrupt everyone around him. This constant chatter created serious tension with other players too. Tony Jacklin, one of the top British golfers, had a major confrontation with Trevino about it. They met in the semifinals of the 1972 Piccadilly World Match Play at Wentworth. Trevino had already broken Jacklin's heart a few weeks earlier at the Open Championship, so when they played again, Jacklin was fed up. He told Trevino, "Lee, I really don't feel like talking today, if that's okay, so I'm probably not going to say much." This was the competitive establishment appealing to the outsider to follow traditional etiquette and be quiet. But Trevino couldn't do it. He said he fed off people, that he was on stage and enjoyed what he did. His reply to Jacklin became another famous line. "Hey, Tone, you don't need to talk. Just listen." Trevino beat Jacklin on the final hole that day. Later, Jacklin gave a surprisingly thoughtful analysis of what happened. He admitted that for Trevino, talking was his release valve, his way of dealing with pressure. He said Lee Trevino was Lee Trevino and he couldn't help himself. But Jacklin also conceded the practical problem. The constant talking was always just a little bit of a distraction, and it did take away something from his opponent's resolve and concentration. This gets to the heart of why the establishment was so uncomfortable with Trevino. Traditional tournament golf relies on an unspoken rule of silence to ensure everyone can concentrate equally. Trevino breached that norm with his authentic self-expression. Even if his motivation was self-preservation and pressure management, the effect was competitive disruption. The demand for silence was a defense mechanism to protect the integrity of the competitive environment from Trevino's destabilizing personality. But if you really want to understand where Trevino's mental edge came from, you have to go back to his hustling days in Texas. Before he joined the tour, Trevino made his living playing high-stakes money matches, and this background gave him a completely different definition of pressure than every other professional golfer. The most famous story involves Raymond Floyd, an established tour pro and notorious big-money gambler himself. Before Trevino became famous in 1967, Floyd heard about this little Mexican kid in El Paso who played for serious cash. So Floyd traveled to Texas for a multi-day money match. Floyd played brilliantly, shooting rounds in the mid-60s, but somehow Trevino went lower. He reportedly shot a 63 and took all of Floyd's Floyd's money. The best part of the story is what happened next. Floyd, stung by the loss, asked for a rematch to win his money back. Trevino refused by saying, "I'd love to, but first I gotta wash all the carts and put them away." This solidified his victory and reinforced his humble, working-class identity. This hustling background gave Trevino a psychological immunity that nobody else on tour could match. He said, "You don't know what pressure is until you've played for $5 a hole with only 2 in your pocket." This is the key to understanding his competitive mindset. Playing for rent money or survival created a level of financial pressure that far exceeded the pressure of playing for a trophy. In comparison, major championships were an easier game. When Trevino joked around while battling Nicklaus in the final round of a major, it wasn't recklessness, it was psychological immunity derived from hardship. By conquering the potentially ruinous financial pressure of the hustling circuit, he rendered tour pressure manageable. The establishment's disdain for his hustler past was completely backward. That background gave him an unparalleled mental advantage. Trevino also had an intense rivalry with Tom Watson, another great champion of the era. Trevino defeated Watson in 4 different major tournaments. Watson was known as the intense one, the grinder. He played as if in a tunnel, blocking out everything except the shot in front of him. Watson built his success on stoicism and perfected technique. Trevino was the opposite. He relied on instinct, showmanship, and resilience. The charismatic, chatting hustler versus the silent, grinding perfectionist. Watson himself said, "A lot of guys who have never choked have never been in the position to do so." While Trevino provided the street-level definition of pressure based on financial desperation, Watson provided the cerebral definition based on opportunity and fear of failure. So let's bring this all together. Why did golf legends think Lee Trevino's methods were substandard? Why did they see him as an outsider who didn't belong? The answer is that he threatened everything they valued. Technically, his lowball flight and unconventional swing defied the classic model that Nicklaus and others represented. Socially, his background as a Mexican-American former hustler clashed with the elitism and racial segregation embodied by people like Cliff Roberts. Psychologically, his constant chatter and unique definition of pressure destabilized rivals who relied on stoic concentration. But here's the paradox. Every single trait the establishment considered a flaw was actually a competitive strength. His ugly swing guaranteed consistency under pressure. His hustler mentality provided immunity from tournament anxiety. His social defiance allowed him to maintain an identity separate from the tour hierarchy. He took his humble origins, his strange ground-bound swing, and his garrulous nature, and he converted them into the very strengths that allowed him to defeat the game's greatest players. Nicklaus dismissed his low ball flight by saying anyone can hit it low, but that technical dismissal failed to recognize that the low flight wasn't a limitation. It was an optimized, reliable defense mechanism against the debilitating hook. It provided unparalleled accuracy when everyone else was cracking under pressure. Tony Jacklin experienced the psychological friction of Trevino's chatter and viewed it as an etiquette violation. But that constant talking was a vital competitive tool that neutralized the rigid focus of his rivals. Most damning of all was the social antagonism from Cliff Roberts and the elitist culture of Augusta National. They tried to define Trevino as an unsuitable outsider based on his race and class. But his response, from refusing the coffee invitation to avoiding an incompatible course, transformed that exclusion into a powerful statement of integrity and self-determination. Raymond Floyd's shock after losing the high-stakes money match underscores the reality. Trevino's hustling background granted him psychological immunity that made major tournament pressure feel comparatively mild. Lee Trevino's legacy is one of subversion. He proved that true greatness doesn't always look elegant. Sometimes it has to grow crooked and rough, forging a path for the unconventional and ensuring that authenticity can permanently shatter the expectations of the elite. The golf legends who thought he was substandard were wrong. They confused non-conformity with deficiency. They mistook difference for weakness, and in doing so, they revealed more about their own limitations than they ever did about his. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of golf's most misunderstood champions, drop a like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments which rivalry surprised you the most, and we'll see you in the next one.